Marcus Chen had been working the midnight shift at the Titan mining station for 3 months when the Zephyrian fleet appeared. The massive crystalline ships materialized out of hyperspace like floating cities of glass and light, their surfaces catching the distant glow of Saturn's rings. Emergency klaxons wailed through the station's corridors as workers scrambled to their positions. "All personnel to emergency stations," came the crackling announcement over the comm system. "This is not a drill. Unknown alien vessels have entered our sector." Marcus dropped his plasma cutter and ran toward the observation deck. Through the reinforced viewport, he could see at least 20 alien ships arranged in a perfect formation. Each vessel was easily 10 times the size of their mining station, their hulls shimmering with an otherworldly blue energy that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. The lead ship began transmitting on all frequencies. The universal translator kicked in after a few seconds of alien speech that sounded like wind chimes mixed with thunder. Humans of this installation, the voice was feminine, commanding, and carried an authority that made the station's hull vibrate slightly. "I am Queen Thessera of the Zephyrian Empire. You will surrender immediately and submit to our authority. We have come to claim this system in the name of the Eternal Crown." Captain Rodriguez, the station commander, appeared on the internal comm screens throughout the facility. His weathered face was grim but determined. "This is Captain Rodriguez to all hands. We are not surrendering this station or this system to anyone. Prepare defensive measures." Marcus knew their defenses were laughable compared to what floated outside. The mining station had basic shield generators and a handful of plasma cannons designed more for clearing asteroid debris than fighting a war. But something stirred in his chest as he watched the alien ships move closer. Humanity had clawed its way out from Earth, established colonies throughout the solar system, and built a life among the stars through sheer stubbornness and ingenuity. They weren't about to give that up without a fight. The first Zephyrian transport ships launched from the main fleet. These smaller craft were still massive by human standards, each one carrying what the sensors indicated were hundreds of life forms. They moved with impossible grace through space, their surfaces rippling like liquid mercury. "Incoming boarding craft," announced Lieutenant Park from the command center. "Estimated time to contact, 8 minutes." Marcus made his way to the armory along with dozens of other miners and technicians. None of them were soldiers, but they all knew how to use the basic pulse rifles stored there for emergencies. The weapons felt inadequate in his hands as he checked the charge level and ammunition counter. "Listen up, people," Captain Rodriguez's voice echoed through the armory. "We don't know what we're facing, but we know who we are. We're humans. We've survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and the vacuum of space itself. Whatever comes through those airlocks, we show them what that means." The first boarding craft attached to Docking Bay 7 with a resonant clang that echoed through the station's superstructure. Marcus was part of the defensive team assigned to that sector, crouched behind makeshift barricades constructed from mining equipment and storage containers. His heart hammered against his ribs as the airlock began to cycle. When the doors opened, the Zephyrians emerged like creatures from a dream. They were tall, easily 8 feet in height, with crystalline skin that reflected the station's lighting in prismatic patterns. Their movements were fluid and precise, almost dance-like. They wore armor that seemed to be grown rather than manufactured, organic curves that flowed seamlessly with their bodies. "Fire!" Captain Rodriguez commanded. The pulse rifles opened up in a coordinated barrage. The energy bolts struck the alien armor and scattered in brilliant sparks, but the Zephyrians barely slowed down. They raised their own weapons, devices that looked more like musical instruments than guns, and returned fire with beams of coherent light that cut through the barricades like they were made of paper. Marcus dove for cover as a beam seared the air where his head had been moments before. The smell of melted metal and ozone filled the corridor. Around him, his fellow defenders were falling back, outgunned and outclassed by technology that seemed like magic. But humans had always been adaptable. When Marcus saw one of the Zephyrian warriors pause to examine a piece of their equipment, he noticed something important. The alien's armor had joints, weak points where the organic material flexed to allow movement. He aimed carefully and fired 3 quick shots at the knee joint of the nearest enemy. The Zephyrian stumbled, its perfect grace disrupted. It wasn't seriously injured, but it was surprised. Marcus shouted to the others, "The joints! Aim for the joints!" The tide of battle shifted slightly. The humans began targeting the weak points in the alien armor, forcing the Zephyrians to slow their advance and take more defensive positions. It wasn't enough to win, but it was enough to make them notice that these humans weren't going to be the easy conquest they had expected. That's when she appeared. Queen Thessera materialized in the corridor like a vision of terrible beauty. She was even taller than her warriors, nearly 9 feet in height, and her crystalline skin held deeper hues of blue and silver. Her armor was more elaborate, with flowing designs that seemed to shift and change as she moved. In her hands, she carried a staff that pulsed with the same energy as her fleet's weapons. "Enough," she said, and her voice carried a psychic weight that made every human in the corridor freeze. "You have shown admirable courage, but this battle is over." She raised her staff, and Marcus felt an invisible force press down on him, driving him to his knees. Around him, his fellow defenders were experiencing the same thing. The Queen's power was overwhelming, like trying to resist a tidal wave with bare hands. "Your species shows promise," Queen Thessera continued, walking slowly among the kneeling humans. "Such determination in the face of superior force. Such ingenuity in adapting to impossible circumstances. Perhaps you will make worthy subjects after all." Marcus struggled against the psychic pressure, managing to raise his head enough to look at the Zephyrian queen. Her eyes were like deep pools of starlight, ancient and powerful beyond human comprehension. In those eyes, he saw the weight of millennia, the knowledge of countless conquered worlds. But he also saw something else. Loneliness. For all her power, for all her empire's might, Queen Thessera was alone at the top of a pyramid of submission and fear. She had everything except what she truly wanted, someone who chose to stand beside her rather than kneel before her. The Queen moved through the group of humans, studying each one with those starlight eyes. She paused at Captain Rodriguez, considering him for a long moment before moving on. She examined Lieutenant Park, the chief engineer, several of the senior miners. Each time, she seemed to find them wanting for some criteria only she understood. Then, she stopped in front of Marcus. He was still struggling against her psychic hold, his muscles trembling with the effort to rise. Blood trickled from his nose where a piece of debris had struck him during the battle. His mining uniform was torn and scorched. By any objective measure, he was the least impressive person in the corridor. But, when Queen Thessera looked into his eyes, something changed. The psychic pressure around him lessened slightly, not gone but no longer crushing. She knelt down, bringing her face closer to his level. "You," she said quietly. "You are different from the others." Marcus found his voice, though it came out as a hoarse whisper. "Different how? When you look at me, you do not see only a conqueror to be feared or a goddess to be worshipped. You see..." She paused, as if the concept was difficult for her to express. "You see a person." The Queen stood and raised her staff again. The psychic pressure on the other humans increased, forcing them flat against the deck. But Marcus remained kneeling, still able to move and speak. "I am Queen Thessera, ruler of 17 star systems, commander of fleets that have swept across the galaxy. I have powers that can reshape matter and bend reality to my will. I am functionally immortal, having lived for over 3,000 of your years. And yet..." She looked down at him with an expression that might have been vulnerability. "I am tired of subjects. I am tired of servants who fear me and generals who worship me and guards who would die for me without question." She extended one crystalline hand toward him. "I offer you something I have never offered anyone in all my millennia of existence. I offer you the choice to stand as my equal. Not as a subject, not as a servant, but as someone who chooses to be here." The corridor fell silent except for the distant hum of the station's life support systems. Every human present stared at the scene in shock and disbelief. The most powerful being any of them had ever encountered was asking a human mining technician to be her equal. Marcus looked at the offered hand, then back at her face. "What about my people? What about this station?" "They will be spared," Queen Thessera said immediately. "More than spared. They will be protected, given technology and resources beyond their current dreams." Your species will have a place in my empire not as conquered subjects but as valued allies. All I ask is that you choose to stand with me. Why me? Marcus asked. I'm nobody special. I fix mining equipment and maintain atmospheric processors. The Queen's expression softened in a way that transformed her from a figure of cosmic authority into something heartbreakingly human-like. Because when every other being in the galaxy either fears my power or covets it, you looked at me and saw loneliness. Because when I could have simply commanded your submission, you made me want to ask for your companionship instead. Marcus thought about Earth, about humanity's long struggle to reach the stars. He thought about his fellow workers, about Captain Rodriguez's defiant courage, about the choice being offered not just to him but to his entire species. The Queen was offering them protection and advancement, but at the cost of him leaving everything he knew behind. But then, he looked at her again, really looked at her, and saw past the crystalline skin and impossible powers to the person underneath. Someone who had conquered galaxies but had never known friendship. Someone who commanded absolute loyalty but had never experienced trust given freely. If I say yes, Marcus said slowly, I need to know that this is real. Not some kind of psychic manipulation or magical compulsion. I need to know that I'm choosing this with my own free will. Queen Thessera nodded solemnly. I could have simply taken control of your mind from the beginning if that was what I wanted. But a controlled mind cannot truly choose, and a forced companion brings no comfort to loneliness. She gestured, and the psychic pressure holding down the other humans completely disappeared. Your people are free. Your choice is your own. Marcus stood slowly, his legs shaky from the extended kneeling. Around him, his fellow humans were getting to their feet, watching the exchange with a mixture of hope and terror. The fate of their entire species seemed to hang on what he did next. He looked at Captain Rodriguez, who gave him a slight nod. He looked at his friends and co-workers, people he had shared jokes and meals and fears with during their long shifts in the darkness of space. Then, he looked back at Queen Thessera, at the loneliness in her ancient eyes and the hope she was trying so hard to conceal. Marcus reached out and took her hand. The moment their skin touched, he felt a jolt of connection that went beyond the physical. For just an instant, he experienced a fraction of what it was like to be her, the weight of absolute power, the burden of immortality, the crushing isolation of being the only one of her kind at the apex of an empire built on conquest and fear. And she, in turn, felt what it was like to be him, the warmth of human friendship, the satisfaction of honest work, the courage that came not from power but from choosing to do what was right even when it was difficult. I choose to stand with you, Marcus said quietly. Not because you command it, not because I fear you, but because everyone deserves to have someone who chooses to be there. Queen Thessera's crystalline features shifted in what could only be described as the first genuine smile she had worn in centuries. Then, let us begin something new, she said. Something neither of our kinds has ever known before. As they stood together in the corridor, surrounded by amazed humans and confused Zephyrian warriors, Marcus realized that this was just the beginning. He had chosen to stand beside the most powerful being in known space, and that choice would change not just his life but the destiny of two entire civilizations. The Queen spoke to her warriors in their musical language, and they immediately began withdrawing to their ships. She turned to Captain Rodriguez and the other station personnel. Your people will be contacted within 3 days by my diplomatic corps, she said, her voice carrying the authority of absolute command but somehow gentler than before. You will be offered technology, protection, and partnership. The choice to accept or decline will be yours, just as the choice to stand with me was his. She looked back at Marcus. Are you ready to leave this place? Marcus nodded, though his heart was heavy with the knowledge that he was leaving behind everything familiar. I'm ready. As they walked toward the airlock where her personal transport waited, Marcus heard Captain Rodriguez speak quietly to Lieutenant Park. Did that really just happen? Did a mining tech just become the consort of an alien queen? I think, Park replied in an equally quiet voice, that mining tech just saved our entire species. The transport ship was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. The interior was grown rather than built, with organic curves and surfaces that seemed to respond to the presence of living beings. Soft bioluminescent lighting provided a warm glow that was somehow both alien and comforting. Queen Thessera led him to what appeared to be an observation lounge,
where transparent walls provided a view of space in all directions.
Her fleet was already beginning to form up for departure, the massive ships moving with the same impossible grace he had witnessed during their arrival. "Are you afraid?" the Queen asked as they stood together watching the stars.
Marcus considered the question honestly. "Terrified," he admitted. "But, not of you. I'm afraid of not being enough. Of disappointing you or failing in some way I can't even imagine yet."
"Those fears," Queen Thessera said quietly, "are remarkably similar to my own." As her flagship began to move away from the mining station, Marcus watched his old life shrink into a distant point of light.
Behind them lay everything he had ever known.
Ahead lay the vast unknown of an empire that spanned star systems, adventures and challenges beyond human imagination, and a relationship unlike any that had ever existed between their species. The Queen stood beside him, no longer the terrible conqueror who had arrived with overwhelming force, but a person who had found something she had never dared hope for, someone who chose to be there not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And Marcus Chen, former mining technician, current chosen companion of the most powerful being in the galaxy, watched the stars wheel by and wondered what tomorrow would bring to a universe that had just become a very different place.
The Zephyrian capital world of Nexareth was a marvel that defied human understanding.
Floating cities drifted through clouds of crystalline vapor while massive spires grew from the planet's surface like organic skyscrapers. The very air shimmered with energy, and gravity seemed to be more of a suggestion than a law of physics. Marcus stood on the observation deck of Queen Thessara's personal quarters, still trying to process the reality of his new existence. 3 weeks had passed since he left the mining station, 3 weeks of traveling through hyperspace toward the heart of an empire that encompassed more worlds than humanity had ever dreamed existed. "The Council of Generals is not pleased with your presence here," Queen Thessera said as she joined him at the viewing wall. She had changed from her battle armor into flowing robes that seemed to be made of liquid starlight, but her expression carried a weight that spoke of difficult conversations. "I gathered that from the way they looked at me during the ceremony," Marcus replied.
The formal presentation to the court had been an exercise in barely concealed hostility from the Zephyrian nobility.
Beings who had served the Queen for centuries regarded him with everything from open suspicion to thinly veiled contempt. "General Vorthak has been my military commander for 800 years, the Queen continued. "Commander Zelani has led my personal guard for 6 centuries. They have conquered worlds in my name and would die without hesitation if I commanded it.
But they cannot understand why I would choose a human as my equal."
Marcus turned to face her fully.
"Can you?"
The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Queen Thessera was quiet for a long moment, her starlight eyes reflecting the swirling clouds of her homeworld below. "For 3,000 years," she said finally, "I have been surrounded by beings who see me as either a goddess or a weapon to be feared. They worship my power, covet my immortality, or submit to my authority out of necessity. You are the first person in all that time to look at me and see someone who might need a friend. Your generals and guards care about you," Marcus pointed out. "I can see it in how they react when you're in potential danger." "They care about their queen," she corrected. "They care about the symbol I represent, the stability I provide, the power I wield. But none of them have ever asked me what it feels like to be immortal while watching everyone around me age and die. None of them have ever wondered if I get tired of making decisions that affect billions of lives. None of them have ever considered that I might want someone to talk to who isn't trying to gain favor or avoid punishment." A soft chime indicated an incoming message. Queen Thessera gestured, and a holographic display materialized in the air between them. The image showed General Vorthak, his crystalline features arranged in what Marcus was learning to recognize as barely controlled anger. "My queen," the general said with a bow that was technically correct but somehow managed to convey disapproval. "The Council requires your immediate presence in the war room. We have received reports of rebellion in the Outer Rim territories." "I will be there shortly," Queen Thessera replied. The hologram vanished, and she turned back to Marcus. "This is what I mean. Another crisis, another war, another decision that will determine the fate of millions. And I will walk into that room alone, as I always have." "No," Marcus said quietly. "You won't." The Queen looked at him with surprise. "The council sessions are not open to—" "I'm not a subject or a servant," Marcus interrupted gently. "I'm supposed to be your equal, remember? That means I stand with you through the difficult times, not just the pleasant ones.
For a moment, Queen Thessera looked as if she might argue.
Then, her expression softened into something that might have been relief.
The Council will not approve of your presence.
The Council will have to get used to it, Marcus replied with a confidence he didn't entirely feel.
Because I'm not going anywhere.
The war room was a vast chamber at the heart of the palace, its walls covered with holographic displays showing the current status of every world in the Zephyrian Empire. Dozens of high-ranking officials and military commanders were gathered around a central table where a three-dimensional map of the galaxy slowly rotated. When Queen Thessera entered with Marcus at her side, the conversation stopped abruptly. Every eye in the room focused on the human who dared to walk beside their immortal ruler as an equal. General Vorthak stepped forward, his massive frame radiating disapproval. He was even larger than the queen, with armor that bore the scars of countless battles and crystalline skin that had been darkened by exposure to the radiations of alien suns. "My queen," he said with another technically correct but emotionally charged bow. "This is a military briefing concerning matters of imperial security. Perhaps your companion would be more comfortable elsewhere." "Perhaps," Queen Thessera replied coolly, "my chosen equal should be present for all matters that concern our empire." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Marcus could feel the weight of dozens of hostile stares, but he kept his expression calm and stood his ground.
Commander Zelani, the head of the Queen's personal guard, spoke up from across the room.
She was smaller than the other Zephyrians but moved with the deadly grace of a predator. "With respect, my queen, this human lacks the experience, training, and authority to participate in strategic planning. He lacks the experience of conquest and the training for war," Queen Thessera agreed. "But he possesses something the rest of us have forgotten, the perspective of someone who has never held power over others. His insights may prove valuable." Marcus stepped forward slightly, addressing the room with as much confidence as he could muster. "I'm not here to give military advice or challenge your expertise. I'm here because the Queen shouldn't have to face these burdens alone." General Vorthak's crystalline features shifted in what Marcus was learning to recognize as contempt. "You speak of burdens as if ruling an empire is some kind of hardship. The Queen wields power beyond your comprehension."
"Power isn't the same as support," Marcus replied.
"Having the ability to command doesn't mean you don't need someone to talk through difficult decisions with." "Enough," Queen Thessera said, her voice carrying the authority that could silence entire worlds.
"Brief us on the situation in the Outer Rim."
General Vorthak activated the holographic display, showing several star systems highlighted in red.
3 worlds have declared independence from the Empire: Karath, Bandara, and HFY Prime.
They've formed what they call the Free Worlds Alliance and are actively encouraging other systems to join them.
"What are their grievances?" the Queen asked.
"The usual complaints about taxation and autonomy," Commander Zelani replied dismissively. "They want to keep more of their planetary resources for themselves rather than contributing to the Empire's needs." Marcus studied the display, noting the locations of the rebellious worlds. They were all in the outer edge of Zephyrian space, far from the core worlds where the Empire's power was most concentrated. "How long have these worlds been part of the Empire?" he asked.
General Vorthak looked annoyed at the interruption.
"Karath was conquered 40 years ago, Bandara 37, and HFY Prime 22. So relatively recent additions," Marcus mused.
"And they're all resource-rich worlds based on the economic data showing here."
"That is precisely why they must be brought back into compliance," General Vorthak stated.
"We cannot allow every conquered world to simply declare independence when they find imperial obligations inconvenient."
"What would you recommend, General?"
Queen Thessera asked. "Overwhelming force," Vorthak replied without hesitation.
"Deploy the 3rd and 7th fleets to each system simultaneously. Crush their defenses, occupy their capitals, and execute their leadership as an example to other potential rebels." Marcus felt his stomach turn at the casual discussion of mass destruction and executions. He looked around the room and saw that most of the other officials were nodding in agreement with the general's assessment.
"What about negotiation?" Marcus asked.
"Have you tried talking to them about their concerns?" The room fell silent again, and Marcus realized he had said something that was apparently unthinkable. Commander Zelani spoke with barely concealed disgust. We do not negotiate with rebels. The Empire's authority is absolute.
But, what if their grievances are legitimate? Marcus pressed on, ignoring the increasingly hostile atmosphere. What if there are ways to address their concerns without destroying 3 entire civilizations?
General Vorthak turned to face him fully, his massive form radiating menace.
You understand nothing about maintaining order across 17 star systems.
Show weakness to one group of rebels, and 10 more will follow their example. I understand that sometimes strength can be shown through mercy as well as force, Marcus replied, standing his ground despite his fear. And, I understand that ruling through terror might work in the short term, but it breeds resentment that eventually explodes into larger conflicts.
You dare lecture us on governance?
Vorthak's voice was rising now, his crystalline skin beginning to glow with inner energy.
You, who come from a species that has barely left its home system? You, who have no understanding of the complexities of empire.
I understand what it's like to be on the other side, Marcus shot back, his own temper flaring. 3 weeks ago, your fleet showed up at our mining station and demanded our surrender. We didn't resist because we hated the idea of being part of an empire. We resisted because nobody asked us what we wanted or offered us any choice in the matter. The tension in the room was approaching dangerous levels. Several of the military commanders had their hands on their weapons, and Marcus could see energy beginning to build around General Vorthak's form.
Queen Thessera stepped between them, her own power radiating outward in waves that made everyone take a step back.
That is enough, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that vibrated through the chamber's crystalline walls. General Vorthak, you will remember to whom you speak. Commander Zelani, your concerns are noted, but your tone is unacceptable. She turned to address the entire room. The human speaks from ignorance of military strategy, but he also speaks from experience of being conquered. Perhaps we should consider whether there might be wisdom in understanding why these worlds rebel rather than simply crushing their resistance. My queen, General Vorthak said, struggling to keep his voice level. If we show mercy to rebels, we invite chaos. The Empire exists because subject worlds know that defiance brings swift and terrible consequences. And, yet, Marcus said quietly, the Empire also exists because some worlds choose to be part of it.
The mining station where you found me?
Captain Rodriguez contacted your diplomatic corps yesterday. They're negotiating to become a protectorate rather than fighting a war they can't win.
Queen Thessera looked at him with interest. They chose to join rather than be conquered? They chose to negotiate rather than be destroyed, Marcus clarified.
There's a difference, but it's a start. The queen was quiet for a long moment, studying the holographic display of the rebellious worlds. General Vorthak, prepare the fleets as you recommended, but do not deploy them yet. Commander Zelani, I want detailed intelligence reports on the leadership of these 3 worlds.
What are their specific complaints? What are they hoping to achieve? And, what are you hoping to achieve, my queen?
General Vorthak asked, his tone carefully neutral but his disapproval clear.
Queen Thessera looked at Marcus, then, back at her assembled commanders.
I am hoping to learn whether an empire built on fear can transform into something built on choice. Whether conquest can evolve into partnership. That, Commander Zelani said coldly, sounds like the kind of dangerous idealism that destroys empires. Perhaps, the queen replied. Or perhaps it is the kind of evolution that allows empires to become something greater than the sum of their conquered territories. As the briefing continued with detailed discussions of fleet movements and intelligence gathering, Marcus found himself thinking about the mining station and Captain Rodriguez's pragmatic decision to negotiate rather than fight. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a beginning. A recognition that there might be alternatives to the endless cycle of conquest and rebellion. He caught Queen Thessera watching him during a pause in the military planning, and he could see in her ancient eyes that she was thinking similar thoughts. The weight of 3,000 years of absolute rule was being balanced against the possibility of something new, something that neither of their species had ever attempted. After the briefing ended and the various commanders filed out of the war room, General Vorthak lingered behind. He approached the queen with the measured steps of someone preparing for a difficult conversation. My queen, he said, his voice formal but carrying an undertone of genuine concern. I have served you faithfully for 8 centuries. I have conquered worlds in your name and defended your empire against all threats.
But I must speak honestly about what I see happening here.
Speak, Queen Thessera said simply.
This human is changing you, Vorthak stated bluntly.
In the 3 weeks since his arrival, you have questioned strategies that have maintained order for millennia. You speak of choice and partnership where once you commanded obedience and loyalty. You risk the stability of the entire empire for the opinions of someone who understands nothing about governance. Marcus felt the urge to defend himself, but something in the general's tone made him pause.
This wasn't just jealousy or xenophobia.
This was genuine fear from someone who had dedicated his life to protecting something he believed in.
Queen Thessera was quiet for a long moment, considering her oldest and most loyal general's words.
You are correct that he is changing me, she said finally. The question is whether the change is for better or worse.
An empire that shows mercy to rebels invites destruction, General Vorthak insisted.
History is littered with the ruins of civilizations that prioritized compassion over strength. And history is equally littered with the ruins of civilizations that prioritized conquest over justice, Marcus said quietly. The Roman Empire fell because it became too expensive to maintain control over unwilling subjects. The British Empire collapsed because it could no longer justify ruling over people who demanded self-determination. General Vorthak turned to face him, his crystalline features hardening.
Your human examples are irrelevant. The Zephyrian Empire has endured for 3 millennia.
By constantly conquering new worlds to replace the ones that rebel or collapse under imperial taxation, Marcus replied.
That's not sustainability.
That's a pyramid scheme that only works as long as there are new civilizations to conquer. The general's energy field began to glow with barely contained power. You understand nothing about the complexities of enough, Queen Thessera commanded, her own power radiating outward in waves that forced both males to step back. General Vorthak, your concerns are noted and your loyalty is appreciated. But you will treat my chosen companion with the respect due to his position. She turned to include both of them in her gaze. We will try a new approach with the rebellious worlds. If it fails, we can always return to traditional methods. If it succeeds, we may discover something that strengthens rather than threatens the empire. General Vorthak bowed stiffly. As you command, my queen. But, when this experiment in compassion leads to disaster, remember that you were warned. As the general left the war room, his heavy footsteps echoing in the crystalline corridors, Marcus found himself alone with Queen Thessera for the first time since the briefing began.
He's not entirely wrong, Marcus said quietly.
I don't understand the complexities of governing an interstellar empire.
I'm making suggestions based on human history and human psychology, and that might not apply to alien civilizations.
Queen Thessera moved to stand beside him at the holographic display, her fingers tracing patterns in the air that made the star map rotate and zoom in on different sectors. Perhaps not, she agreed. But General Vorthak and the others don't understand the complexities of loneliness and the burdens of immortality. They see strength and weakness in purely military terms. You see them in terms of relationships and trust. She manipulated the display to show the 3 rebellious worlds in detail, their planets rotating slowly in the projection field. For 3,000 years, I have ruled through fear and power. It has been effective, but it has also been exhausting.
Every decision is mine alone. Every consequence is mine to bear. Every failure is mine to answer for.
That's what I meant when I said everyone deserves someone who chooses to be there, Marcus said.
You shouldn't have to carry that burden alone.
Queen Thessera looked at him with an expression that was part gratitude and part apprehension. What if you're wrong? What if showing mercy to these rebels does lead to the collapse of everything I've built? Marcus considered the question seriously. Then, we'll face that consequence together. But what if you're wrong? What if 3,000 years of ruling through fear has created more problems than it solved? The queen was quiet for a long moment, her ancient eyes reflecting the light of distant stars. I suppose, she said finally, that we're about to find out. As they stood together in the war room, surrounded by the holographic representation of an empire that spanned star systems, Marcus realized that the real battle wasn't going to be fought with fleets and weapons. It was going to be fought with ideas and choices, with the possibility that two very different species could find a way to build something better than what had come before. The child who had chosen him had set in motion changes that would ripple across the galaxy. Whether those changes led to a golden age or the collapse of civilization remained to be seen. But, for the first time in 3,000 years, Queen Thessera wouldn't have to face that uncertainty alone. The diplomatic mission to Karath was unlike anything the Zephyrian Empire had attempted in its 3,000-year history. Instead of warfleets and occupation forces, Queen Thessera's flagship arrived alone, accompanied only by a small escort of diplomatic vessels. Marcus stood beside the Queen on the bridge as they entered the Karath system, watching the planet grow larger on the viewscreen. It was a beautiful world of blue oceans and green continents, with a ring of orbital habitats that sparkled like jewels in the system's golden sunlight. The Karathian defense fleet is moving to intercept, reported Commander Zelani from her position at the tactical station. 12 vessels, primitive by our standards but sufficient to damage our ships if they attack en masse. Open a communication channel, Queen Thessera commanded. All frequencies. The main viewscreen shifted to show the bridge of the lead Karathian vessel. The beings that appeared were humanoid but with pale blue skin and elongated features. Their captain wore a uniform that was functional rather than decorative, and his expression was a mixture of determination and barely concealed fear. "I am Captain Jorik of the Karathian Defense Force," he said, his voice transmitted through universal translators. "You will halt your approach immediately or we will consider it an act of war." "I am Queen Thessera of the Zephyrian Empire," the Queen replied, her tone formal but not threatening. "I have come to speak with your leadership about your recent declaration of independence." Captain Jorik's expression shifted to one of confusion. "You've come to speak? Not to conquer?" "I have come to understand," Queen Thessera clarified. "To learn why you chose rebellion over continued membership in the Empire." The communication channel fell silent for several moments. Marcus could imagine the frantic conversations taking place on the Karathian ships as they tried to process the unprecedented situation. This could be a trap," Captain Jorik said finally. "A way to get close to our world before attacking." "If I wanted to conquer Karath," the Queen replied matter-of-factly, "I would not need to resort to deception. I could have arrived with a fleet capable of overwhelming your defenses within hours." Marcus stepped forward slightly, entering the communication field. "Captain Jorik, my name is Marcus Chen. I'm human, from a mining station that was recently contacted by the Zephyrian Empire. We chose to negotiate rather than fight, and it saved countless lives." The Karathian captain studied Marcus with obvious surprise. "You're not Zephyrian. What is your position in their hierarchy?" "I'm the Queen's chosen companion," Marcus replied. "And I'm here because I believe there might be alternatives to the cycle of conquest and rebellion." Captain Jorik looked back and forth between Queen Thessera and Marcus, clearly struggling to understand the dynamics at play. "You would trust the word of a conqueror? She destroyed the Valaxi system just 15 years ago when they attempted independence." Queen Thessera's expression hardened slightly at the reminder of past actions. "The Valaxi chose violence over diplomacy. They attacked Imperial supply convoys and assassinated our diplomatic envoys. I responded with overwhelming force because I saw no other option." "And, now?" Captain Jorik asked. "Now I have someone who helps me see other options," the Queen replied, glancing at Marcus. "Will you allow us to land? Will you speak with us in person rather than through military channels?" The communication channel closed as the Karathian captain consulted with his superiors. Marcus could see the Queen's tension in the set of her shoulders, the way her fingers gripped the armrest of her command chair. "What if they refuse?" she asked quietly. "Then, we prove that we're serious about peaceful negotiation by withdrawing and trying again later," Marcus replied. "Sometimes trust has to be built over time." Commander Zelani spoke up from her station. "My Queen, General Vorthak is requesting permission to bring the Third Fleet to this system as backup. He believes this peaceful approach is leaving us vulnerable to attack." "Denied," Queen Thessera said firmly. "If we arrive with military force, we prove that we haven't really changed our approach at all." The communication channel reopened, and Captain Jorik's image reappeared. "Our leadership has agreed to meet with you." You may land at the capital city of New Korath, but only with a minimal escort.
Any sign of treachery will be met with immediate retaliation.
Understood and accepted, Queen Thessera replied.
We will bring only a small diplomatic team.
2 hours later, Marcus found himself walking through the corridors of the Korathian government complex alongside Queen Thessera and a minimal security detail. The architecture was functional and elegant, built from local materials that gave everything a warm, organic feel that contrasted sharply with the crystalline perfection of Zephyrian construction. Their guide was a young Korathian named Lygia who served as a diplomatic attaché. She kept glancing nervously at Queen Thessera as if she expected the Zephyrian ruler to suddenly unleash devastating powers. The Council of Ministers is waiting in the main assembly hall, Lygia said as they approached a set of ornate double doors. I should warn you that there's still significant debate about whether meeting with you is wise.
Their caution is understandable, Queen Thessera replied.
I would be suspicious as well if a conqueror suddenly claimed to want peaceful dialogue.
The assembly hall was filled with Korathian officials, their pale blue faces arranged in expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility.
At the center of the room stood a semicircular table where the Council of Ministers sat in formal robes of office. The lead minister, an elderly Korathian with silver hair and deeply lined features, stood as they entered.
I am First Minister Torvin. Queen Thessera, your presence here is unexpected.
I'm sure it is, the Queen replied. For 3,000 years, the Zephyrian Empire has responded to rebellion with conquest and punishment.
I am here to explore whether there might be a better way.
Minister Torvin gestured for them to take seats at a smaller table that had been prepared for the meeting. You'll forgive us if we find this sudden change in policy difficult to believe. Marcus spoke up as they sat down. Change is always difficult to believe, especially when it comes from someone with a history of using force. But sometimes circumstances arise that make change necessary. And what circumstances would those be? Asked another minister, a younger Korathian woman with skeptical eyes.
Queen Thessera looked at Marcus, then back at the assembled officials.
I have lived for over 3,000 years, ruling an empire that spans 17 star systems. In all that time, I have never had anyone challenge my decisions who wasn't either seeking power for themselves or acting out of fear.
This human looks at my empire and asks questions I have never considered. What if there was a better way? What if conquest could be replaced by partnership? First Minister Torvin leaned forward with interest. And what does this human suggest?
I suggest, Marcus said, that we start by listening.
What are your specific grievances with imperial rule?
What would it take for Korath to consider remaining part of the empire voluntarily rather than being held by force? The question seemed to surprise the Korathian officials.
They exchanged glances before Minister Torvin spoke carefully. Our primary complaint is economic, he said.
Imperial taxation takes 60% of our gross planetary product, leaving us barely enough resources to maintain our infrastructure and provide for our population's basic needs. The taxation rate is standard across all imperial territories, Queen Thessera replied, but her tone was thoughtful rather than dismissive. Standard, yes, but devastating for outer rim worlds that lack the established trade networks of core systems, explained the younger minister. We spend enormous resources shipping raw materials to imperial processing centers, then buy back finished goods at inflated prices.
It's a system designed to benefit the core worlds at our expense. Marcus nodded thoughtfully.
So the issue isn't necessarily being part of the empire, but the terms under which you're part of it.
Exactly, Minister Torvin confirmed. We don't hate Zephyrian civilization. We admire your technology and your achievements. But we can't survive as a people if imperial policies continue to drain our resources.
Queen Thessera was quiet for several minutes, her ancient mind processing information and possibilities.
What would you propose as an alternative?
Reduced taxation in exchange for guaranteed resource quotas, Minister Torvin replied immediately, clearly having thought about this extensively. Preferential trade agreements that allow us to process our own raw materials. Technical assistance to develop our infrastructure without incurring crushing debt.
And, in return, the Queen asked. Continued membership in the Empire.
Access to imperial protection and technology. Participation in imperial governance through expanded representation in the Council of Worlds.
Marcus looked at Queen Thessera and saw her considering the proposal seriously.
It wasn't capitulation or conquest. It was negotiation, compromise, the building of a relationship based on mutual benefit rather than domination. These terms would set a precedent, the Queen said slowly.
Other worlds would demand similar arrangements.
Would that be such a terrible thing? Asked the younger minister.
An empire where member worlds prospered rather than merely survived? Where loyalty was based on shared benefit rather than fear?
Commander Zelani, who had remained silent throughout the meeting, stepped forward slightly.
My queen, I must advise caution. Negotiating with rebels sends a message of weakness throughout the empire. Does it?
Marcus asked, looking directly at the commander.
Or does it send a message that the empire is strong enough to change? That it's confident enough in its value to member worlds that it doesn't need to hold them by force?
First Minister Torvin looked between the Queen and her advisors, clearly recognizing that he was witnessing an internal struggle within the highest levels of Zephyrian government.
Queen Thessera, he said carefully, if you're truly willing to consider new arrangements, we would be honored to work with you. But we need assurance that this isn't simply a delay tactic before traditional military conquest.
Queen Thessera stood, her crystalline form catching the light from the hall's windows.
I cannot give you guarantees about the future, Minister Torvin. What I can give you is my word that if we can reach an agreement here, I will honor it. And if we cannot, I will withdraw my forces and leave you in peace to pursue your independence.
The silence that followed was profound. Everyone in the room understood that they were witnessing a moment that could reshape the fundamental nature of an empire that had existed for millennia.
We accept those terms, Minister Torvin said finally. Let us see if we can build something new together.
The negotiations continued for 3 days. Marcus found himself playing an unexpected role as a translator between two very different ways of thinking. The Carathians approached everything from a perspective of community consensus and shared resources.
The Zephyrians thought in terms of hierarchy and efficiency.
Neither approach was wrong, but they often led to completely different conclusions about the same problem.
Queen Thessera proved surprisingly adaptable, considering alternatives that would have been unthinkable to her just weeks earlier.
When the Carathians proposed a reduction in taxation from 60% to 35%, she countered with 40% but agreed to allow them to retain control of their own resource processing facilities. When they requested representation in imperial governance, she offered them seats on the Council of Worlds proportional to their population and economic contribution. When they asked for technology transfers to improve their infrastructure, she agreed in exchange for guaranteed delivery quotas of rare minerals that were essential to Zephyrian industry. By the end of the 3rd day, they had hammered out an agreement that neither side found perfect but both sides could live with. Korath would remain part of the empire under new terms that gave them significantly more autonomy and a larger share of their own prosperity. This is only the beginning, Queen Thessera said as they prepared to leave Korath. Word of this agreement will spread to every corner of the empire.
Some worlds will request similar negotiations.
Others will see it as a sign of weakness and increase their resistance. Marcus stood beside her on the balcony of the government complex, watching the dual suns of the Korath system setting over the capital city. Change is never easy, especially change this fundamental. But the alternative is continuing a system that breeds rebellion and costs enormous resources to maintain. General Vorthak has sent 17 messages demanding an explanation for our actions here, the Queen said with a slight smile. Commander Zelani has been remarkably quiet, but I can feel her disapproval. They're afraid, Marcus observed. They've devoted their entire lives to a system that they believe works. The possibility that there might be a better way threatens everything they think they know about the universe. Queen Thessera turned to look at him, her starlight eyes reflecting the last light of the setting suns.
And, you? Are you afraid? Marcus considered the question honestly.
Terrified, he admitted. We're gambling with the stability of an entire empire based on the hope that people from dozens of different species can learn to trust each other. If we're wrong, billions of lives could be lost in the chaos that follows.
But, if we're right, the Queen asked softly. If we're right, we'll have created something unprecedented in galactic history. An empire based on choice rather than conquest.
A civilization where different species work together because they want to, not because they have to. As they watched the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, Marcus thought about the mining station where this all began. Captain Rodriguez and his crew were probably settling into their new roles as a protectorate, learning to navigate the complex relationship between Earth's expanding presence and the vast Zephyrian Empire.
"There's something I need to tell you," Queen Thessera said quietly.
The other rebellious worlds, Vendara and HFY Prime, have requested similar negotiations after hearing about our agreement with Korath.
Marcus looked at her with surprise. "That's good news, isn't it?"
"It's hopeful news," she replied. "But it also means that the old system is truly ending. Whatever emerges from these changes, it won't be the same empire I've ruled for 3,000 years.
Are you okay with that?" Marcus asked. Queen Thessera was quiet for a long moment, considering the weight of millennia and the uncertainty of the future. "For 3,000 years, I ruled alone.
Every decision, every consequence, every burden was mine to carry. Now I have someone who chose to stand beside me, and, together we're choosing to build something different.
Something better, I hope." She reached out and took his hand, the contact sending that familiar jolt of connection between them. "Whatever comes next, at least I won't face it alone."
As they stood together under the alien stars, Marcus reflected on the impossible journey that had brought them to this moment. A child's choice had led to a queen's transformation, and that transformation was rippling across the galaxy in ways they were only beginning to understand. The future was uncertain. General Vorthak and the military traditionalists would continue to resist changes that threatened their worldview. Some worlds might abuse the new freedoms they were being offered.
Others might reject partnership entirely and choose true independence.
But, for the first time in 3,000 years, the Zephyrian Empire was evolving rather than simply expanding. The cycle of conquest and rebellion was being replaced by something unprecedented, the possibility of an empire where member worlds remained by choice rather than compulsion. Marcus Chen, former mining technician, current companion to the most powerful being in the galaxy, squeezed Queen Thessera's crystalline hand and watched the stars wheel overhead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new negotiations, new opportunities to prove that even ancient empires could change when the right person chose to stand up and offer a different way forward. The child who had chosen him had chosen well. The universe was about to become a very different place, and, for the first time in either of their long histories, both humanity and the Zephyrian Empire would face that future as partners rather than conquerors or conquered. In the end, it wasn't overwhelming force or superior technology that had changed the course of galactic history. It was the simple recognition that everyone, even immortal queens who ruled star systems, deserved to have someone who chose to stand beside them. And, sometimes, that choice was enough to change everything.